The first man rose so suddenly that his chair scraped across the ballroom floor. The sound cut through the music like a blade. Every conversation stopped. Every glass froze halfway to someone's lips. Then another man stood. And another. Within seconds, all 20 groomsmen were on their feet near the center of my daughter's wedding reception. Dark suits. Straight backs. Shoulders squared with military precision. Every one of them turned toward me. My ex-wife, Linda, was still smiling. She had one hand wrapped around a wine glass and the other resting against the shoulder of her second husband. Moments earlier, she had introduced me to a room full of wealthy strangers. "This is Daniel. My pathetic loser ex-husband." Several guests laughed politely. A few laughed harder than they should have. One of Richard's business friends slapped the table as though Linda had delivered the funniest joke of the evening. But now nobody was laughing. All 20 groomsmen raised their right hands and saluted me. The oldest among them stepped forward. His voice was calm, clear, respectful. "Ma'am, that man is a Four-Star Admiral." I watched the color disappear from Linda's face. She inhaled in exactly the wrong moment. Wine caught inside her throat. She coughed so violently that red wine sprayed across the white tablecloth in front of her. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that I could hear ice shifting inside champagne glasses. And there I stood in the middle of an expensive Charleston country club, wearing a gray suit I had purchased 12 years earlier, wishing I were anywhere else on earth. Because moments like that do not feel satisfying. Not when it is your daughter's wedding. Not when the woman humiliating you was once the love of your life. And not when you spent 40 years learning how to remain calm under enemy fire, only to discover that family can wound you more deeply than any stranger ever could. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 68 years old that night. Retired United States Navy. And by the end of that wedding, almost every person in my family would be forced to confront a truth they had spent decades avoiding. The trouble began 3 days earlier when Emily called. My daughter rarely called first. Most of our conversations during the previous 15 years have consisted of birthday messages, Christmas texts, and brief telephone calls filled with careful silence. The kind of silence that grows slowly between two people until neither remembers who stopped speaking honestly first. I was sitting on the back porch of my small townhouse near Annapolis, polishing an old pair of deck boots, when my phone rang. I saw her name on the screen and nearly dropped the brush. "Dad?" Emily still had the same gentle voice she had carried as a little girl. "Hey, sweetheart." A pause followed. "You're still coming to the wedding, right?" I looked toward the Chesapeake Bay. Gray water. Gray sky. An early October wind moving across the surface. "I didn't know whether you wanted me there." That isn't true. Maybe it was not completely true. But it was complicated. Linda had spent most of Emily's childhood telling her that I cared more about ships than family. And if I am being honest, there were years when that accusation was not entirely wrong. Military life takes pieces of you gradually. A birthday here. An anniversary there. A recital. A Christmas morning. Then one day you look back and realize the uniform received the strongest years of your life while your family survived on whatever remained. But I love Emily more than my pride. "I'll be there." She exhaled softly. As though she had been holding her breath. "Good." Then another pause. "Mom's family is coming from Charlotte and Savannah. Richard invited a lot of business people too." There it was. The warning hidden inside her words. Richard Holloway, Linda's second husband, was a southern real estate developer who wore expensive loafers without socks and treated waiters like invisible furniture. Wealth clung to him like cigar smoke. I understood what Emily was really asking. "Dad, please don't make anything uncomfortable. I'll behave myself." That isn't what I meant. But it was. I drove 9 hours from Maryland to Charleston in my old Ford pickup. I had grown tired of airports. Too much waiting. Too many lines. Too many impatient people watching older men move more slowly than they once did. The truck still ran beautifully. The Navy taught me that machinery survives when someone respects maintenance. When I pulled beneath the country club entrance on Friday afternoon, a young valet approached. He could not have been older than 19. He glanced at the truck. Then at me. "Delivery entrance is around back, sir." I smiled. "No delivery. I'm here for the wedding." His ears turned red. "Oh. I'm sorry, sir." "It's all right. People see an old truck and create an entire biography. It happens every day." Inside, the lobby smelled like polished wood, expensive perfume, and money. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Flower arrangements stood taller than some of the children in attendance. Women crossed the marble floor in dresses that probably cost more than my monthly retirement check. I spotted Linda immediately. She stood near the grand staircase wearing a dark emerald gown. Diamonds circled her neck. At 66, she still carried herself as though she expected to be the most beautiful woman in every room. Some habits survive everything. She saw me. For half a second, her expression froze. Not affection. Not happiness. Calculation. Then the performance smile appeared. Well. Daniel actually came. Several nearby guests turned. Richard approached carrying a glass of bourbon. "Dan." He managed to make my name sound like an inconvenience. "Didn't know whether that old truck's navigation could bring you this far south." I ignored the comment. "Where's Emily?" "Upstairs getting ready." Linda examined my suit. "You could have purchased something new." I glanced at my sleeve. "It still fits." Richard chuckled. Linda joined him. Humiliation feels different after 60. By that age, life has already delivered it through illness, loss, money, children, and regret. You learn that reacting gives cruel people the reward they are searching for. So I stayed calm. That is one of the few useful powers age gives a man. "I should say hello to my daughter." Linda moved slightly into my path. "Before you disappear." She caught my arm and turned me toward a group near the bar. "Everyone, this is my ex-husband, Daniel." The group offered polite smiles. Then Linda laughed and added, "My pathetic loser ex-husband." The laughter arrived quickly. Too quickly. Not openly vicious at first. More like wealthy people accepting permission to mock someone safely beneath them. An older man smirked. A woman whispered behind her champagne glass. Richard grinned openly. My daughter's future relatives looked at me with instant pity. A cold sadness moved through me. Not because of Linda. Because Emily stood halfway down the staircase. She had witnessed everything. And she said nothing. The rehearsal dinner was worse. Richard delivered small insults throughout the evening. "How is retirement treating you, Dan? Still living inside that little townhouse? You military people certainly don't become wealthy." Linda laughed every time. At one point, she placed her hand over Richard's and said, "Thank God Emily finally had one stable father figure." That comment hurt. Not because it was completely true. Because part of Emily probably believed it. I excused myself and stepped onto the balcony overlooking the marina. Harbor lights shimmered across the black water. For several peaceful minutes, I considered leaving. Quietly returning to my truck. Driving north before the wedding happened. Saving everyone the discomfort of my presence. Then I heard footsteps. One of the younger groomsmen stood behind me. Tall. Military haircut. The posture of a man trained to notice details. "You all right, sir?" "I'm fine." He continued staring. His expression changed. Recognition. Disbelief. Then his eyes widened. "Oh my God." I frowned. "What is it?" He swallowed. "Sir, are you Admiral Daniel Mercer?" I looked at him. "Yes." The young man's face went pale. 3 other groomsmen had stopped several steps behind him. Every one of them stared at me. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't recognize you." "That's all right." The others approached carefully. Respectfully. One straightened instinctively. "My father served beneath you in Bahrain, sir." Another nodded. "You spoke at my commissioning ceremony in Annapolis." That was when I understood. Military people recognize things civilians miss. Posture. Bearing. The way someone occupies silence. You can remove the uniform, but after 40 years, parts of it remain stitched into the bones. The first young man extended his hand carefully. "Lieutenant Brandon Keller, sir. Navy SEAL Team." I shook his hand. "Good to meet you, Lieutenant." His face brightened like that of a much younger man. More footsteps arrived. News travels quickly among military people. Within minutes, nearly every groomsman had gathered on the balcony. Marines. Navy officers. 2 active-duty SEALs. An Air Force pilot. Michael, Emily's fiancé, came from a military family. No one had mentioned that to me. Perhaps Linda preferred that nobody examine my history too carefully. A Marine captain looked confused. "Sir, with respect, why are you sitting out here alone?" I almost laughed. "I'm trying not to ruin my daughter's wedding." The men exchanged uncomfortable looks. Brandon glanced toward the windows. "We heard what your former wife said." "It's fine." "No, sir." He spoke carefully. "It really isn't." I rested both hands against the railing. The October breeze carried salt from the harbor. If any of you remain married long enough to reach your 60s, you'll learn something. "What is that, sir?" Sometimes people repeat a story so long that they stop knowing whether it is truth or simply the version they needed to survive. No one spoke. Then one Marine asked, "Does Miss Emily know who you are?" That question struck harder than expected. Technically, yes. Emily knew I retired as an admiral. She knew I had served overseas. She knew presidents had shaken my hand. But titles mean little to children who remember empty chairs at birthdays. Linda made certain of that. And, to be fair, my career did too. I looked down at the water. My daughter knows pieces of me. I barely slept that night. The hotel room smelled of bleach and aging air conditioning. At 3 in the morning, I lay awake remembering another night nearly 30 years earlier. Linda stood inside our kitchen in Virginia Beach. Emily was 9. "You missed her recital again." "I was deployed." "You were always deployed." I loosened my tie. Exhaustion burned behind my eyes. "We were tracking a submarine in the Persian Gulf." "I couldn't exactly leave." "You always have an explanation." That argument repeated for years under different names. I chose duty. Linda chose resentment. Neither of us completely wrong. Neither completely innocent. People prefer simple villains. Real marriages rarely provide them. But resentment left unattended eventually hardens into identity. And bitterness had become part of Linda's personality. Saturday morning arrived bright and warm over Charleston. The wedding was scheduled for late afternoon. I walked alone along the waterfront before breakfast. Old brick buildings. Church bells. Horse-drawn carriages carrying tourists. Charleston always felt suspended between elegance and ghosts. By noon, the country club was alive with activity. Florists moved arrangements. Caterers carried trays. Photographers issued commands. I stayed mostly invisible. Military command had taught me that leadership often means understanding when not to speak. At approximately 2, I found Emily alone near the garden entrance. She looked beautiful. Not only because of the dress. For one moment, I saw the little girl who once ran into my arms at naval homecomings. Her expression softened when she saw me. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, sweetheart." We stood awkwardly. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. Quickly. Almost cautiously. But it mattered. "You doing all right?" "I'm fine." She looked down. "Mom can get carried away." "Sometimes." That was generous. "It's your wedding day. Don't worry about me." Emily nodded. Guilt flickered across her face. "I'm glad you came." Before I could answer, Linda's voice cut through the hallway. "Emily, the photographer needs you upstairs." My daughter immediately tensed. Linda approached in heels sharp enough to puncture concrete. Her eyes landed on me. "Well." Family bonding. Mom, Emily sighed. Linda ignored her. Daniel, try not to look miserable in the photographs. People may think we forced you to attend. Younger men may crave confrontation in moments like that. Older men become tired. I'll survive the photographs. Linda folded her arms. You were always good at surviving. Emily looked between us as though she were 16 again. Then Linda noticed several groomsmen watching from across the lobby. Their expressions were respectful. Why do those young men keep staring at you? I shrugged. No idea. But I knew. And so did Lieutenant Keller near the elevators, struggling visibly not to salute me in public. The ceremony was beautiful. Sunlight filtered across white chairs facing the water. A string quartet played beneath oak trees draped in Spanish moss. I sat alone in the third row. Richard sat in the front beside Linda, looking as though he had personally constructed the occasion. When Emily walked down the aisle, my chest tightened so violently that I gripped the chair. No matter a person's age, seeing his child on her wedding day opened something inside him. I remembered holding her inside the hospital the night she was born. I deployed 2 weeks later. I remembered missing her high school graduation when my carrier group was redirected during an overseas crisis. I remembered every lost year at once. After the ceremony, guests moved into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed. Servers carried bourbon, shrimp and champagne. A jazz band played beside the dance floor. I took a seat near the back wall. The groomsmen whispered among themselves and kept glancing toward me. Especially once Linda began drinking. By her second glass, her voice grew louder. By the third, her cruelty returned. I sensed something approaching. Something pride had made her incapable of seeing. Linda always became crueler when wealthy people were watching. I noticed it years earlier at Navy charity dinners. If senators were present, she smiled more brightly. If executives attended, she laughed more loudly. And if someone appeared weaker than she did, she performed. That evening, she performed for an audience of tuxedos, pearls, property developers, and old Southern money. The ballroom overlooked Charleston Harbor. The water glowed gold beneath distant lights. On the surface, everything was elegant. Underneath, tension waited like a loaded weapon. I drank black coffee. Never alcohol during emotional events. An old habit. Across the room, Linda moved from table to table collecting attention. Richard followed proudly. At one point, I heard him boasting to Michael's father about a luxury development near Hilton Head. $10 million project. We deal only with serious investors. Then his eyes moved briefly toward me. Subtlety had never been his strength. One of the younger SEALs approached my table. "Sir, permission to speak freely." I almost smiled. "Go ahead. With all respect, why are you allowing them to speak to you this way?" I looked toward Emily across the dance floor. She stood beside her new husband while a photographer circled them. "Because tonight isn't about me." The young man tightened his jaw. "That woman has no idea who you are." I stirred my coffee. "No. She knows exactly who I am." That was the tragedy. Linda knew the sacrifices. The deployments. The funerals. The nights I returned unable to sleep after losing sailors under my command. She knew all of it. But resentment changes memory. Eventually, people stop remembering your suffering and remember only how your suffering inconvenienced them. An hour later, the speeches began. The band quieted. Guests settled. Emily sat beside Michael at the sweetheart table. She looked radiant. I genuinely liked the young man. Former Marine officer. Steady eyes. Solid handshake. The kind who still opened doors for elderly women without expecting praise. Richard delivered the first toast. Predictably, half of it praised himself. Linda laughed before everyone else had time to decide whether a joke was funny. Then came stories about Emily's childhood. Stories carefully edited to erase me. Richard described teaching her to drive. Helping with college applications. Comforting her through heartbreak. Some of it was true. He had been present. But each story felt like another shovel of dirt over the years Linda had already buried beneath resentment. Then Linda stood with her wine glass. "Oh, I have one." The room chuckled warmly. I immediately became tired. When Emily was 12, Daniel promised to take her to a father-daughter dance. Several guests looked toward me. Linda continued. "He forgot because apparently the Navy needed him more than his own daughter." A few people laughed softly. My stomach tightened. That night had haunted me for decades. A storm struck our carrier group unexpectedly. Communications failed for nearly 36 hours. By the time I received Linda's messages, the dance had ended. I called Emily from a satellite telephone in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I cried while apologizing to a 12-year-old child. Linda left that part out. She sat inside her little dress waiting all night. Linda shook her head theatrically. Poor thing eventually realized her father would always choose work. The room became quieter. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Emily looked down at her plate. She remembered too. Linda raised her glass. But thankfully, Emily eventually had Richard. A real father figure. Richard grinned. Several people applauded politely. I looked at my coffee. Still warm. Still black. Years earlier, I might have defended myself. Age changes that need. You stop requiring strangers to understand your history. Before Linda could sit, a groomsman stood. His chair scraped across the floor. Then another man rose. Then another. Within seconds, all 20 groomsmen were standing. Straight backs. Eyes forward. Military posture. The ballroom fell silent. Linda blinked. What is happening? The oldest groomsman stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, that man commanded some of the finest military personnel this country has ever produced. A ripple moved through the room. Richard frowned. What? Another groomsman spoke. Admiral Mercer led operations that saved American lives overseas. Another voice followed. My brother served beneath him. Another. He recommended me for advanced training. Another. He visited my father after Afghanistan. One by one, the young men spoke. Not theatrically. Not loudly. Honestly. Respectfully. Then Lieutenant Brandon Keller stepped into the center of the ballroom. Ma'am, that man is a four-star admiral. Dead silence. Confusion spread first. Then recognition. Then embarrassment. People physically turned to look at me differently, as though my worth had changed in a single sentence. Linda's face became pale. No. Her voice weakened. Daniel retired as some kind of officer. Four-star Admiral, ma'am, Brandon repeated. Richard stared at me. You were a four-star Admiral? I hated the question. Not because it insulted me. Because it revealed that after 20 years of judging me, no one had cared enough to ask. Linda drank at the wrong moment. Wine caught inside her throat. She coughed violently. Red wine struck the linen. Emily rose halfway from her chair. Mom. Linda was not injured. Only exposed. And suddenly, the ballroom felt unbearably small. An older guest whispered. My God. That's Admiral Daniel Mercer. A retired businessman near the bar stood. Mercer? The Persian Gulf Operations Commander? I closed my eyes briefly. This was exactly what I had never wanted. The entire room transformed. People who had ignored me 30 minutes earlier now stared with admiration. Respect. Curiosity. The ugliest part of human nature revealed itself again. Most people do not honor character. They honor status. Linda looked shattered. Richard looked frightened that he may have insulted the wrong man. But I watched Emily. My daughter stared as though half her life had suddenly been rearranged. For decades, she had heard one version of the story. Now 20 military men were standing before her, offering another. Someone finally asked. Admiral, why didn't you say anything? I looked around the ballroom. Then at Emily. I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came because my daughter invited me. Nobody spoke. Not even Linda. The jazz band had stopped. Servers stood frozen with trays in their hands. Emily appeared overwhelmed. Michael placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Whispers traveled through the room. Four-Star Admiral. Why did nobody know? I hated every second. Not because Linda was embarrassed. Because the wedding had stopped being about Emily. That was never what I wanted. I stood slowly. Excuse me. Nobody tried to stop me. I walked toward the marina. Charleston Harbor shimmered beneath dock lights. Distant boats moved across black water. I leaned against the railing and breathed. Humiliation fades more quickly than disappointment. Standing beside that water, I realized I was no longer angry. Only tired. After several minutes, I heard heels behind me. Emily. I recognized her footsteps. She stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered. Why didn't you tell me? I kept my eyes on the harbor. What would have changed? That isn't fair. No. I nodded. Maybe it isn't. She folded her arms against the wind. I feel like I don't know you. That hurt because it was true. Military fathers sometimes become photographs. Voices on telephones. Uniforms arriving home between deployments. Men celebrated by strangers and barely understood by their own children. You know pieces of me. Emily looked down. Mom always said you cared more about the Navy than us. The sentence that had sat between us for decades finally had a voice. I did not answer immediately. At 68, a man learns that silence can be more honest than defense. Sometimes she had reason to feel that way. Emily looked surprised. You admit it? Of course. I rubbed my hands against the cold. When you were young, I missed birthdays. Recitals. Holidays. There were years I spent more time with sailors than with my own family. But you were serving the country. Yes. But families still pay the price. Emily's eyes glistened. I used to wait near the window for you. That sentence nearly broke me. I remembered her small face pressed against the glass whenever my leave date approached. I remembered every disappointment. I know. She looked toward the water. Mom said you chose your career. Your mother was lonely. That answer surprised her. She expected bitterness. Blame. I gave her the truth. Being married to someone in the military is not flags and speeches. It is missed anniversaries. Fear whenever the telephone rings. Raising a child alone half the year. She wanted stability. I kept giving her uncertainty. But she made you sound like a failure. I smiled sadly. When people hurt long enough, they sometimes rewrite the story in a form they can survive. Emily studied me. Perhaps for the first time as an adult. Did you really save people overseas? The question sounded strange coming from my own daughter. Yes. Were you famous in the Navy? I wouldn't say famous. But important? Power matters less with age. Eventually, every title becomes temporary. I had responsibilities. Emily's voice softened. Why didn't you defend yourself? There it was again. The question everyone asked. The true answer was, because I loved you more than I loved winning. But those words felt too heavy. So I said, you were a child. I didn't want you trapped inside a war between your parents. Emily wiped one eye. I spent years angry at you. I know. You missed so much. Yes. And when Mom remarried, you disappeared. That accusation was not completely fair. Pain rarely is. I believed giving you space would make life easier. It didn't. Her honesty stung. I know that now. For several minutes, we listened to water against the dock. Then Emily asked, did you love Mom? I smiled faintly. With everything I had. What happened? I remembered tiny Navy apartments. Cheap furniture. Young love. Fear. Pride. Exhaustion. We grew older and stopped seeing each other clearly. Footsteps approached. Michael. He looked uncomfortable interrupting us. Sorry. Your mother is asking for you. Emily sighed. Of course she is. Before leaving, Michael looked toward me. Sir. You don't have to call me sir tonight. He smiled. Yes, sir. I laughed for the first time that evening. After they returned inside, I remained near the water for another 20 minutes. During that silence, I understood something painful. Linda's insults had not wounded me most. What hurt was realizing how much of Emily's childhood had been shaped by my silence. I had believed dignity meant enduring quietly. Perhaps the Navy trained me too well. But children cannot understand love that is never explained. Eventually, absence begins to look like indifference. I returned to the ballroom around 10. Everything had changed. Guests who ignored me earlier now nodded respectfully. Older men approached to shake my hand. One woman apologized for laughing at Linda's joke. I told her not to worry. But I noticed Linda. She sat rigidly beside Richard. Her wine remained untouched. Richard looked unsettled. As though he had suddenly realized the man he spent years mocking once commanded fleets larger than the militaries of some nations. Status is a strange thing. People worship it when they believe it belongs to someone important. They resent it when they realize they overlooked it sitting beside them. Then the bandleader announced the father-daughter dance. The lights dimmed. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite the bride and her father to the dance floor. Every eye turned toward Richard. For nearly 20 years, he had played the role of stable provider. Private schools. College tuition. Vacations. This expensive wedding. He rose immediately and smiled toward the photographers. Linda looked relieved. The evening needed to return to appearances. A graceful ending. Richard extended his hand toward Emily. She did not move. At first, no one noticed. Then confusion spread across the nearest tables. Richard's smile weakened. Emily? My daughter stood beside her chair. Fear. Sadness. Guilt. Then resolve crossed her face. She turned toward me. The ballroom became so quiet that I could hear the chandeliers humming. Emily walked across the room. Not toward Richard. Toward the lonely table near the back where I sat beside cold coffee. Panic rose inside me. Not because I did not want the moment. Because I understood what choosing me would cost her publicly. Linda whispered sharply. Emily. My daughter continued walking. Past the wealthy investors. Past the in-laws. Past the people who had laughed. Then she stopped in front of me. Her eyes were already wet. Dad? I looked up. Speechless. Her voice sounded suddenly like the little girl she had once been. Would you dance with me? God help me. At 68, after combat zones, buried sailors, emergency briefings, and decades of command decisions, that simple question nearly destroyed me. I stood slowly because my knees no longer trusted themselves. Are you sure? Emily nodded. Yes. The musicians changed songs. A slower melody. Old-fashioned. Gentle. The kind people once danced to inside kitchens before weddings became productions. We stepped onto the floor. Nobody spoke. Not even Linda. Emily placed one hand on my shoulder. I held the other. For one moment, she looked like the little girl who used to stand on my shoes while I guided her around our living room. I blinked hard. You used to dance with me inside the kitchen, she whispered. You were terrible. A laugh escaped through her tears. You always stepped on my feet. You stepped on mine first. She cried harder. We had lost decades to silence neither of us fully understood. As we moved beneath the chandeliers, memories struck one after another. Emily asleep against my chest as an infant. Teaching her to ride a bicycle in Norfolk. Watching a recording of her school play aboard an aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. Missing birthdays. Missing Christmas mornings. Missing ordinary Tuesdays fathers are supposed to take for granted. Military men tell themselves sacrifice will make sense later. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it leaves empty chairs. Emily looked up. "Did you really keep all my letters?" I swallowed. "Every one. Every deployment? Every deployment. They're inside a box in my closet." Her lips trembled. "Mom said you stopped caring." "I never stopped." "Then why didn't you fight harder for me?" That question cut deepest. I had asked it of myself for years. "Because I believed staying quiet would protect you." Emily closed her eyes. "It didn't." I nodded. "I know." Around us, guests watched. Several older women wiped their eyes. Even some of the SEALs looked emotional. Soldiers understand absence. They understand families carrying loneliness while service members become heroes to strangers and ghosts to their children. Halfway through the song, I looked toward Linda. She appeared shattered. Not angry. Confronted. Richard sat stiffly beside her. For the first time that night, I saw something unexpected inside Linda's expression. Regret. Not regret for leaving me. Regret for shaping Emily's memories against me. The song ended. Silence remained for several seconds. Then applause spread through the room. Not loud. Not dramatic. Gentle. Respectful. Emily hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Dad." I shook my head. "No. Not tonight. But you were a child. None of this was yours to carry." She cried openly. Without thinking, I wiped the tears from her cheek the way I did when she scraped her knees as a little girl. After the dance, guests approached differently. Not only because of my rank. Because they had finally seen the cost beneath it. A Korean War veteran held my hand for nearly a minute without speaking. A Marine colonel thanked me for leadership during difficult years. Michael's wealthy grandfather approached quietly. "Sir, I misjudged you." I smiled. "It happens every day." The moment that remained with me came during Emily's toast. She stood beside Michael holding a champagne glass with trembling hands. I spent most of my life believing strength looked like success. Money. Stability. Appearances. Her eyes found mine. But tonight I learned that real strength sometimes looks like sacrifice nobody sees. Several guests lowered their eyes. Emily continued. "My father spent his life serving people while accepting that many of us might never understand the cost." Linda began crying quietly beside Richard. Older tears. The kind that arrive when someone understands pride stole years that cannot be recovered. Emily raised her glass. "To my father. The man who taught me dignity does not need to shout." The room rose. Applause surrounded me. But I did not feel victorious. Only grateful. For the first time in years, my daughter saw me clearly. The reception ended near midnight. The ballroom looked physically unchanged. The same chandeliers. The same jazz trio. Half-empty glasses. Melting candles. Crumpled napkins. But the atmosphere had changed. People spoke quietly. More honestly. The performance was over. I waited near the coat check for my old jacket. Michael approached carrying 2 coffees. "I thought you might want this for the drive tomorrow." I accepted one. "Thank you." He hesitated. "I owe you an apology, sir." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." He glanced toward the ballroom. "I should have asked more questions. About Emily's father. About your service. About everything. You were avoiding family politics. Smart man." He laughed softly. Then his expression became serious. "I want you to know something." "What?" "I love your daughter." The sincerity in his voice settled something inside me. "I know. And I will take care of her." I nodded. That is all any father wants. We stood drinking coffee while the staff cleared tables. Michael smiled. "The SEALs are still arguing about who recognized you first." I groaned. "Tell them to let it go." "No chance, sir." He turned to leave. Then stopped. "Emily wants breakfast with you before you leave." That sentence made the entire painful evening worthwhile. At approximately 1 in the morning, I stepped into the Charleston air. The harbor breeze carried salt. I had almost reached my truck when Linda called. "Daniel." I stopped. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I turned. Linda stood beneath the entrance lights. Her makeup had faded. She carried her heels in one hand. She no longer looked like the sharp woman from the ballroom. She looked like the tired young woman I married 40 years earlier. Age sometimes strips away performance until only truth remains. "I thought you would leave without saying goodbye. I believed that might be easier." Linda gave a weak laugh. "You always thought silence solved everything." I could not argue. She looked toward the harbor. Then spoke. "I was cruel tonight." Honesty sounds strange after decades of waiting. I placed my hands inside my pockets. "Yes. You were." Linda nodded as though she deserved the answer. "I kept telling myself you deserved it." I said nothing. "You left me alone for years. Every deployment. Every holiday. Every night wondering whether someone in uniform would knock on the door." Her voice trembled. "I was angry for so long." "I know." "No." She looked directly at me. "I don't think you do." Perhaps she was right. Military men understand danger. Duty. Sacrifice. Sometimes we fail to understand loneliness inside our own homes. When Richard came along, I convinced myself that leaving you meant choosing a better life. You chose a different life. Years passed. And I had to keep believing you were the villain. She stopped. "Otherwise?" Her eyes filled. "Otherwise, I would have had to admit I helped break our family too." That hurt more than every insult. Not because it excused her. Because it was painfully human. Marriages rarely collapse because of one villain. Usually, two people injure each other gradually while trying to survive disappointment. Linda looked down. "When those men stood tonight, I realized something." "What?" "You never needed anyone's respect. You already had it." I almost smiled. "That took you 30 years. A small laugh escaped through her tears. Then silence returned. Old silence. Familiar silence. Linda studied me. "Did you ever hate me?" I considered the divorce. Custody battles. Years of bitterness. The distance from Emily. Everything. Then I shook my head. "No." Linda looked surprised. "Why?" "Because carrying hatred into old age is exhausting. Grief eventually matures into perspective. Time humbles everyone. We were young. We failed each other differently." Linda wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel." Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Real. That made it matter. I stepped closer and kissed her forehead. The way I once did before deployments. "Take care of yourself, Linda." Then I turned toward my truck. This time, she did not stop me. I left Charleston before sunrise. The roads were almost empty. Only truck drivers and fishermen moving toward the coast. As the city disappeared, orange light began rising over the Atlantic horizon. I lowered the window and breathed cold air. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Not victorious. Peaceful. There is a difference. Revenge makes a person feel powerful for a moment. Understanding allows him to rest. At a red light near Mount Pleasant, my phone vibrated. A message from Emily. "Thank you for coming, Dad. I love you." I pulled the truck onto the shoulder. At 68, after commanding fleets, briefing presidents, and surviving conflicts overseas, those 4 words meant more than every medal I had ever received. I stared toward the sunrise before answering. "I love you too, sweetheart." Then I drove north. Windows open. Radio low. And somewhere along that quiet coastal highway, I understood the real victory. It was not exposing Linda. It was not making wealthy strangers respect me. It was not watching anyone regret underestimating me. I entered that wedding carrying years of silence. I left carrying my daughter's love. Several weeks later, Emily visited my townhouse in Annapolis. She arrived alone. No wedding dress. No cameras. No crowded ballroom. Only my daughter standing on the porch with 2 coffees and a box of pastries. When I opened the door, she smiled nervously. I thought we could start with breakfast. I stepped aside. That sounds like a good place to start. We sat at my small kitchen table. The conversation was awkward at first. Where do 2 people begin after losing half a lifetime? With the truth. Slowly. Without pretending one breakfast can repair decades. Emily asked about my deployments. I asked about the years after the divorce. She told me about waiting near the window. I told her about carrying her letters across oceans. She cried. So did I. There was no audience to applaud. No groomsman to salute. Only a father and daughter finally meeting each other as adults. Before leaving, she asked to see the letters. I took her upstairs. Inside my closet, beneath old uniforms and winter blankets, was a wooden box. Every letter she had written during every deployment remained inside. Children's drawings. Birthday cards. Photographs. A note written in purple crayon. Come home soon, Daddy. Emily held it against her chest. You kept all of this? Every piece. She looked around. Why didn't you show me? I believed keeping it proved enough. I shook my head. I was wrong. Love hidden too carefully can begin to look like love that never existed. That became the lesson I carried from the wedding. Not that rank eventually earns respect. Not that truth embarrasses cruel people. Not that appearances deceive. Those things are true. But the deeper lesson was this. Silence is not always dignity. Sometimes silence becomes a wall. I spent years believing I was protecting Emily by refusing to speak against her mother. Instead, I allowed one version of the past to become the only version she knew. I allowed my absence to speak for me. Absence rarely says what we hope it will. Months passed. Emily began calling every Sunday. Sometimes the conversations lasted 5 minutes. Sometimes 2 hours. Michael joined occasionally. He still called me sir even when I told him not to. Old habits. Linda and I did not become friends. Life is not always repaired that neatly. But we stopped using old wounds as weapons. At Thanksgiving, she called. Her voice sounded careful. Emily wants both of us there. I know. I can be civil. So can I. There was a pause. Then she said. Maybe we can do better than civil. We can try. Trying was enough. Not forgiveness without accountability. Not pretending the past never happened. Only 2 older people accepting that their daughter deserved peace more than either of them deserved to win. People later asked whether I enjoyed watching Linda humiliated. I did not. Her cruelty deserved to be confronted. But humiliation is not healing. It only exposes the wound. Healing came later. On the marina. On the dance floor. In the parking lot. At my kitchen table. That is the part people often misunderstand about dramatic moments. The public reveal is not the ending. It is the beginning of the difficult private work that follows. The 20 groomsmen standing did not give me my daughter back. They only opened the door. Emily had to walk through it. So did I. If your family misunderstands you, remember this. Dignity matters. But explanation matters too. Do not turn your pain into a weapon. But do not hide love so deeply that the people who need it can no longer find it. Character outlasts appearances. Dignity outlasts humiliation. Truth eventually reaches the surface. But when it does, make certain you use it to build something. Not merely to destroy the person who buried it. The groomsmen saluted my rank. The ballroom respected my history. But none of that mattered as much as one frightened woman in a wedding dress crossing the room and asking, "Dad, would you dance with me?" That was the moment I stopped being Admiral Mercer. I became Emily's father again. And that was the only title I had ever truly wanted to keep. If life has made you feel invisible, Do not confuse being overlooked with being worthless. If family has misunderstood your sacrifice, speak before silence hardens into history. And when the truth finally places respect back inside your hands, carry it with grace. Because approval given cheaply disappears quickly. But love recovered honestly can return a man's entire life.